Yeah.
There's a researcher named Christopher Bone wrote a book on moral origins. Why is it the human animal developed morality and no other animals did? And there's Joe Brewer, who wrote a book called, wrote an article that you can get about there's 70 million psychopaths around the world. What are we going to do about them? Why do they exist? What is it in terms of evolution that allows the psychopath to continue to show up in our culture? And I don't have the answer to that.
I do. I just read a book about it.
Okay.
Go ahead. Spell it out there, Laura.
Yeah, just get a copy of my latest book. It's entitled Comets and the Horns of Moses, and it's basically the title is self-explanatory because for me the Horns of Moses is the big dichotomy in our culture between people with conscience and people without conscience. And, this relates in a more recent period, for example, the Renaissance Enlightenment, to the decision to separate the body from the mind. The I think, therefore I am. And, of course, for Descartes, that meant that, he was imagining everything material, or he could be. I think, therefore I am, total subjectivity. And then along come the materialists, and they turned that on its head, since he had established this, this clear distinction in the mind-body problem between consciousness and matter, or between spirit and matter, or whatever. They established that matter was the only thing that absolutely existed, and consciousness itself was a byproduct of matter. So, for example, your cells communicating with each other, and you imagine you have consciousness or whatever. So those are the kinds of problems I deal with, as well as, some theoretical speculations about where, how, and why psychopaths come along, and I think you might enjoy it.
Well, how do you spell your last name?
Pardon? Jadczyk. Jadczyk.
Okay, well, thank you.
You can find it on Amazon.
Yeah, there's another book that's already out called The Apocalypse. Comet. I can't think of the rest of the title right now. That's very bad since I edited it.
Just go on Amazon and put my name in.
Her name. There's one with the word apocalypse in the title, and that one goes into detail on that topic as well.
Okay. Well, one of the things I'm glad you folks are doing what you're doing is I feel that the general population is incredibly ignorant of how civilization has been distorted to its present status by the influence of psychopaths.
You're going to love my book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, I'm working on my own.
Okay,
good stuff. Send us an email when it's done, and we'll see if we can give you a little promo there.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks for your call, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a topic for another show.
Oh, absolutely.
The history
of psychopathy.
Where do they come from?
Psychopaths in history, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, one thing that a lot of people do is because of the kind of materialistic representation of evolution, it almost can sometimes, when it's presented a certain way, seem like psychopaths should have an edge. Unless you sit down and really, really think about it, it's like, yeah, why don't psychopaths have an edge? And they do have an edge in a certain sense, but the problem is they tend to sort of, they tend to infect a population, abuse it, take everything, and then destroy it because they're so self-interested and they start to spread and collect together and rule, right? It's like this whole, Lobachevsky kind of talks about this, when they get put in charge of an economy, they can't stop making all these backroom deals and raping the economy left, right, and center.
Well, that's what we're seeing today. That's what we're seeing today. So at first, yes, they do benefit. They get super filthy, stinking rich at the expense of everybody else, but eventually the society will collapse because of what they do, which is what happened in Russia. They became so corrupt that everything fell apart. It was not because of a revolution of the people that they became what they are now today. It's because the psychopaths were so rapacious and just basically ended up ruining the entire government for themselves because they just couldn't stop with this whole corruption stuff. So in the end, it leads to ultimate destruction, but at first it does seem very successful.
I just want to give a title of that book for Matt and anyone else who is interested in this topic of the origins of psychopathy, among other things. The book's by Laura Knight-Jadczyk. It's on Amazon. It's called The Apocalypse: Comets, Asteroids, and Cyclical Catastrophes. Anybody who's interested in this topic will find that book very interesting.
And I think Matt will especially enjoy the in-depth historical research that I've done, and the fact that I have cited everything with the original sources, and you will have footnotes galore. If you're a footnote junkie like I am, you're going to love it.
Indeed. So I just wanted to get back to my point there before that. Those few calls. Harrison, you're still there, I trust?
Yes.
Okay.
We're getting back to you in a minute, Harrison. Just hang on.
This topic of how psychopaths spread their influence among society. You've talked about that already. You've mentioned basically the spread of psychopathic ideals that are based essentially on a lack of conscience, a lack of empathy. There's also a lot of lies and lying going on to manipulate the population. But what I'm wondering here is there a difference? If there's a difference, let's say psychopaths are fundamentally different, psychologically at least, from normal human beings, but is there a difference potentially in the normal population that makes some people more susceptible to being infected, let's say, if I can use that word, by these psychopathic ideals than others?
Yeah, one of the researchers that gets into this would be Bob Altemeyer from, I think he's retired now, but he taught at the University of Manitoba, and he talks about authoritarians. Now, if we're going to divide humanity into these certain groups, we'll have psychopaths and non-psychopaths, and then for all the non-psychopaths, I think there's a spectrum where you'll get on one end of the people, or on one end of the spectrum, you'll get people who will just basically obey any authority for any reason and to any extent, and then the other end of the spectrum, you'll get people that question authority and will actually use their reason to determine the best course of action. And so with authoritarian followers, these are the people that will back any decision made by the authorities. They'll even make excuses for the authorities. So if whoever's in power, if they bend the rules a little bit, well, that'll be okay for them. But for anyone else, that'll justify extreme prison sentences or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before the last few callers a couple experiments, the Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison experiment. Now the Milgram one seems to me a pretty good way of demonstrating this. Now, for anyone that's not familiar with it, Milgram originally set up this experiment where you had the two people. One was like a confederate of the experiment, so he was basically an actor, and he would pretend to be a person answering questions on basic learning. So the test subject, the person that actually didn't know what was going on, would ask certain questions. And whenever the other person got a question wrong, he was to push a button to give the other person an electric shock. And as the questions went on, the more that they got wrong, the higher the shock would be, until it reached a point where the shock would be lethal. And when the test subject would push that button, the person on the other end of the experimenter's room would stop responding. And for all the test subject knew, that person was now dead. Now, I forget the exact figures, but I think something like between 60 and 80%, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think it was 65.
65 went till the very end, pushing the button for the maximum electrical shock.
Well, I mean,
now,
one detail about the experiment was the guy who was being asked the questions was an actor, and he was supposed to progressively make louder and louder screams as he received shocks, and then at one point say, "I have a heart condition, you're going to kill me," or something like that. And he was acting and hamming it up.
But the person administering the shocks
did it anyway.
Had a guy an authority figure in a white coat standing beside him who was saying, "You need to continue with the experiment. You need to continue. You need to continue." And 65% of the people selected went ahead up to the officially lethal level of shock.
So they virtually killed their subjects.
Yeah, but at the same time, Milgram, who conducted this experiment, said that virtually all of those people exhibited, for what it's worth, all of those people exhibited signs of being under high stress, at being told to continue with what they understood to be.
But they still did it
they
anyway.
Didn't want,
but they didn't enjoy it, but they continued.
They didn't enjoy it, but they continued doing it regardless of their own conscience. So they did have conscience, but they ignored
But it was overruled by authority.
Right.
You know, so 65 to 35% of the population, and then there was other experiments done that put it more or less at half and half.
Okay.
Where half, and statistically that's not really notable, but it seems to be coming out around maybe half of the people who were engaged in this experiment would go ahead and do what the authority told them to do, up to the point of killing another human being for no good reason, and half didn't. So, Harrison?
Well, I think there's a lot of disinformation about this, even because some people will interpret it as the kind of the be-all, end-all of explaining why certain atrocities happen in the world. So they'll use it to explain, or they used it to explain the Holocaust, for example, that it's just people following orders, and that's the end of the answer. That's it. It's just that people will follow orders, and they think that that's the essence of the problem. Now, the point that I think that they leave out is that, okay, well, who in normal society would take the position of the authority, would take the position of that doctor or that experimenter saying, no, you have to go on, no, you have to go on? Well, when you look at real life examples, if you look at the Nazis, and if you look at any history of psychopaths in power, it's the psychopaths in power that are doing it. That's the essential part of the equation. And so you'll get people that will engage in atrocities, that will kill other people just because they're following orders. Now the thing is, like Jason mentioned, they're doing it even if they don't want to do it. They're experiencing all kinds of inner tension, and looking back, like they've interviewed some of these people, years after the fact of doing this experiment, and one of the things they found is just how traumatic it was, but also how much they learned from it. And so in a society that's ruled by psychopaths, you've got to take those two things into account: the people giving the orders, and the people that really don't know what's going on, that have no experience, no knowledge of this kind of situation, and they're just like deer in the headlights, where they're put in this situation that's completely foreign to them. Like normal human beings interacting with each other would never experience something like that. They'd never experience someone egging them on to kill someone.
So
what's that?
Go ahead.
So when they are put in that situation, they don't have any real alternatives. They haven't thought it through. They haven't been trained in questioning authority. Yeah,
or maybe they don't fundamentally question authority, because this is one thing you mentioned, Altemeyer, and maybe this is division among normal human beings in terms of people who have just naturally, by definition of who they are, have an inner sense of their own authority, and therefore can rely on that, whereas people who don't have that, and I'm using this term authority very loosely, what it actually means in terms of a difference between people, I don't know, but people who don't have that their own internal sense of authority feel compelled to rely on or need an external authority to make decisions for them, make important decisions for them, and if they are in the presence of that authority, they will defer to that, because they don't have that ineffable whatever it is within them that will make them resist someone who is